Throughout human history, a strange pattern appears. Not in one culture, not in one text, not in one tradition, but across civilizations separated by oceans, deserts, and centuries. Stories of beings who did not rise from the earth but descended from the sky. They arrive suddenly, they bring knowledge, they establish law, they introduce order, and then, just as mysteriously, they vanish. In Mesopotamia, divine figures were said to legitimize kingship. In ancient Hebrew traditions, beings known as watchers observed and sometimes intervened. In other civilizations, teachers descended from the heavens to introduce writing, agriculture, astronomy, or moral codes. The names change, the languages differ, the symbols vary, yet the structure remains strikingly consistent: a descent, a transfer of knowledge, a transformation of humanity, and eventually, a departure. The question is not whether these stories exist, they do. The question is why they resemble one another so closely. Ancient civilizations did not share global communication. They did not exchange theological manuscripts. They did not coordinate mythological frameworks, yet they preserved similar narratives. Beings from above who altered the course of human development. Were these accounts symbolic? Were they metaphors for political authority? Or do they preserve something older, something remembered but reshaped through myth? Before we decide, we must understand how ancient people perceived the world. To them, the sky was not empty space, it was power. It was mystery here. It was authority. Everything beyond reach was placed above. Kings ruled from elevated thrones. Temples were constructed on hills and mountains. Divinity was imagined in the heavens. Height symbolized hierarchy, and hierarchy symbolized control. So when knowledge was described as descending from the sky, it may not have implied physical descent. It may have represented legitimacy, divine approval, the right to govern. But here's where the pattern becomes more complex. In many accounts, these beings are not distant, abstract gods. They interact directly with humanity. They speak, they teach, they instruct, and in some traditions, they cross boundaries. Certain texts describe watchers who do more than observe. They interfere, they introduce knowledge that is described as forbidden. They alter the natural order, and in some narratives, they are judged for it. This is not a simple tale of benevolent gods, it is a story of tension between heaven and earth, between knowledge and obedience, between order and transgression. Why would multiple cultures preserve narratives in which knowledge arrives from above, yet warn that knowledge can corrupt? Is this a symbolic reflection of power structures, or a memory of a turning point in human history? There was a period when humanity changed dramatically. Agriculture emerged, cities formed, writing systems developed, law codes were formalized. We describe this as progress. Ancient people often described it as a gift from the heavens. Were they romanticizing their own evolution or encoding their transformation into sacred narrative? If we interpret everything literally, we risk fantasy. If we interpret everything as pure metaphor, we risk oversimplification. So in this exploration, we will do neither. We will examine the structure, the repetition, the consistency across cultures, because patterns matter. And when a pattern appears independently in separate civilizations, it deserves careful attention. The watchers, the teachers, the lawgivers. They may not be what modern imagination wants them to be, but they are not random inventions either. Before we dismiss them as myth, we must understand the function they served. In the next part, we will examine one of the earliest recorded accounts in which beings from the heavens crossed the boundary between observation and interference, and the consequences that followed. Among the oldest surviving texts of the ancient world, there exists a story that stands apart. It is not merely about gods, it is about beings who crossed a boundary. In ancient Hebrew tradition, preserved in what is commonly known as the Book of Enoch, a group of entities called the Watchers are described not as distant deities but as observers. Their role at first was simple. They were to watch, to observe humanity, to remain separate. But the story does not end there. According to the narrative, the Watchers descend, not symbolically, but intentionally. They cross from heaven to earth, and with that descent, something changes. They do not arrive to rule kingdoms. They do not claim worship. Instead, they teach. They introduce knowledge that humanity did not previously possess: metallurgy, astronomy, cosmetics, weaponry, hidden arts, knowledge that reshapes civilization. But the text calls this knowledge forbidden. Why? Why would knowledge be considered transgression? Because in the story, the Watchers were not authorized to interfere. They were meant to observe, not participate. Their descent is described as an act of rebellion, and rebellion has consequences. In the narrative, the Watchers are judged, bound, cast down. Their knowledge remains, but they do not. Now pause. Whether one views this text as sacred history, symbolic myth, or apocalyptic literature, one fact remains. This is not a simple story of divine blessing. It is a story of broken boundaries. Heaven and earth were not meant to mix. Knowledge was not meant to be freely given. And when that boundary was crossed, imbalance followed. This theme, beings descending, teaching forbidden knowledge, and facing judgment, appears in multiple traditions. In Mesopotamian lore, certain divine figures bring advanced understanding to humanity. In Greek mythology, Prometheus steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans, and is punished eternally. Fire in that story represents knowledge, power, technology. The pattern repeats. A higher realm, a descent, a gift of knowledge, a punishment. This raises a difficult question. Were ancient cultures encoding a warning that knowledge without wisdom can destroy? Or were they preserving memory of a cultural shift so dramatic that it felt otherworldly? There was a time when humanity transitioned from scattered tribes to structured societies, from oral memory to written record, from survival to strategy. To those experiencing it, such transformation may have felt like intervention, as if something beyond humanity had altered its trajectory. But here's where caution is necessary. The Book of Enoch is not included in most canonical religious traditions. It survives in fragments and later compilations. Its language is symbolic, apocalyptic, layered with metaphor. It speaks of giants, judgment, cosmic order. It is not a modern historical document, and yet its structure mirrors other myths. The Watchers are not worshipped as supreme gods. They are intermediaries, transgressors, figures who blur the line between divine and human. Why does this matter? Because it reveals something deeper than surface narrative. It reveals anxiety. Anxiety about knowledge, about power, about crossing limits. In nearly every civilization, there is a story about forbidden wisdom, about a boundary that should not be crossed. Why would humanity repeatedly imagine such a boundary? Is it psychological? A reflection of our fear of rapid change? Or does it point to an ancient awareness that knowledge transforms societies irreversibly? When the Watchers teach metallurgy, the world gains tools, but tools can become weapons. When they teach astronomy, the sky becomes measurable, but mystery diminishes. Knowledge empowers, but it destabilizes. Perhaps the story is not about celestial beings at all. Perhaps it is about us, about the moment humanity gained power faster than it gained restraint. And yet, the consistency of the descent motif remains. Beings from above, a transfer of knowledge, a boundary crossed, a consequence. In the next part, we will step back even further beyond Enoch to examine whether this pattern predates written scripture entirely, and if so, what that might imply. Long before the Book of Enoch was written, long before the Watchers were named, there were other stories. Older ones, in ancient Mesopotamia often called the cradle of civilization, we find narratives that predate most surviving religious texts. Among them are accounts of beings known as the Anunnaki. In later interpretations, they are sometimes portrayed as mysterious visitors from the heavens, but in the original text, they are described more carefully. They are divine figures associated with authority, destiny, and cosmic order. They are connected to kingship, to the right to rule, to the structure of civilization itself. And once again, the sky plays a central role. In Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, the heavens were not empty. They were layered, structured, hierarchical, just as their cities were, just as their governments were. The divine realm mirrored the human one, or perhaps the human realm mirrored the divine. Certain Mesopotamian texts describe divine beings granting kingship to humans, not inventing civilization from nothing but legitimizing it, bestowing authority, establishing order. This is important because here the descent motif shifts slightly. It is not about forbidden knowledge, it is about power. The authority to rule does not emerge from below, it comes from above. And in a world where kings claim divine approval, this narrative reinforced stability. But there are also more enigmatic passages. In some myths, humanity is created to relieve the gods of labor. In others, divine beings interact closely with early humans. There are floods sent as judgment. There are councils of gods debating the fate of civilization. Again, the pattern appears: a higher realm, a lower realm. Interaction, interference, consequence. The flood narrative, preserved in Mesopotamian epics such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, predates the biblical flood account, and yet the structure is similar: divine decision, human survival, a reset. These similarities raise uncomfortable questions. Were these stories borrowed and adapted, or do they reflect a shared mythological structure rooted in a common human experience? When civilizations rise in river valleys, when floods shape survival, when kings consolidate power, myth becomes a way to encode history. But myth also amplifies, it elevates, it transforms memory into cosmic drama. The Anunnaki, in their original context, are not extraterrestrial figures. They are divine authorities within a structured pantheon, and yet the language of descent remains. Heaven and earth are separated. Movement between them is significant, not ordinary. Why did ancient people imagine power as descending? Why not emerging from within humanity itself? Perhaps because early societies required legitimacy. Authority feels stronger when it comes from above. It feels inevitable, sacred, unquestionable. But there is another possibility. What if these stories preserve psychological memory? The memory of sudden transformation, the memory of a shift so dramatic that it felt external. When agriculture replaced hunting, when cities replaced tribes, when writing replaced oral tradition, the world changed rapidly. To those living through it, the source of that change may have seemed beyond human origin, as if knowledge arrived rather than evolved, and yet caution remains necessary. Ancient texts are layered with symbolism. They are poetic, ritualistic, political. They are not modern historical records. If we read them literally, we distort them. If we dismiss them entirely, we lose insight. So instead of asking whether the Anunnaki were physical visitors, a more useful question may be this: what function did the descent narrative serve? Did it justify kingship? Did it explain catastrophe? Did it encode environmental memory? Or did it express a deeper human intuition that power and knowledge are not neutral, that they arrive with consequence? Across Enoch, across Mesopotamia, across cultures separated by geography and time, the pattern persists: descent, knowledge, authority, judgment. In the next part, we will examine how this pattern evolves as societies move toward monotheism, and what happens when many divine intermediaries collapse into a single, supreme authority. As civilizations grew more complex, their gods began to change. Early pantheons were crowded: sky gods, storm gods, fertility gods, war gods. River gods, each force of nature had a face, each mystery had a personality. Power was divided just as nature itself was divided, but something shifted. As political systems centralized, as empires expanded, as authority consolidated, so did belief. Many gods became fewer. Fewer gods became one. This was not an overnight transformation. It was gradual, layered, and strategic. In polytheistic systems, divine authority was shared. No single being controlled everything. But in emerging monotheistic traditions, authority became absolute. One God, one source of law, one moral center. And when power becomes singular, intermediaries change. In earlier traditions, figures like the Watchers operated between realms. They were not supreme gods. They were not ordinary humans. They existed in the space between, observers, messengers, sometimes transgressors, but as monotheism solidified, that middle space became dangerous. A single supreme authority leaves little room for independent divine actors. So what happens to the Watchers? They evolve. In some traditions, they become angels. In others, fallen angels. Their role narrows. Their autonomy fades. They are no longer ambiguous figures who blur boundaries. They are either obedient servants or rebellious adversaries. The tension remains, but the structure tightens. Why? Because centralized belief systems mirror centralized political systems. When a king rules absolutely, divine authority must also appear absolute. Multiple competing heavenly powers create instability, but a single sovereign God reflects a unified empire. Religion and governance have always moved in parallel. As earthly power centralizes, so does sacred power. This transformation reshapes the narrative of descent. In polytheistic myths, gods descend freely. They interact, they argue, they compete. But in monotheistic systems, descent becomes rarer, more controlled, more purposeful. Divine contact is no longer common interference. It is revelation, it is prophecy, it is structured communication. The chaotic boundary crossing of the Watchers becomes unacceptable. Because in a unified moral universe, knowledge must be regulated. Authority must flow from a single source. And so the earlier tension between heaven and earth, between knowledge and obedience, takes on a sharper moral edge. The story shifts from cosmic drama to moral instruction. Rebellion becomes sin. Transgression becomes evil. The descent motif does not disappear. It transforms. In Christianity, the idea of fallen angels echoes earlier Watcher narratives. In Islamic tradition, beings like Iblis refuse obedience. In Jewish mysticism, layered hierarchies of angels persist. The intermediaries survive, but within tighter structure. This raises a deeper question. Was monotheism a theological revolution or a political one? When many divine authorities collapse into one, the world becomes simpler, more ordered, but also more rigid. The ambiguity of earlier myths fades. The gray becomes black and white, and the Watchers, once ambiguous figures crossing boundaries, become symbols of disobedience. Yet the underlying pattern remains: descent, knowledge, boundary, consequence. Even in monotheistic systems, the anxiety about forbidden knowledge persists. The story of Eden reflects it. The tree of knowledge, the crossing of a limit, the consequence of awareness. Across cultural transformations, the core tension survives. Humanity seeks knowledge, authority seeks control, and the sky remains the symbolic source of both. In the next part, we will step away from specific traditions and ask a broader question. Why does humanity repeatedly imagine knowledge is coming from above? Is it psychological, sociological, or something deeper in the architecture of myth itself? Why does the sky hold such power over the human imagination? Why do civilizations separated by geography and language imagine knowledge descending rather than rising? Why above and not within? To answer that, We must step away from theology and step into psychology. For early humans, the sky was not an abstract concept. It was overwhelming. Storms arrived without warning. Lightning split the darkness. The sun determined survival. The stars moved with silent precision. Everything unpredictable, everything vast was above, and everything small, fragile was below. The sky was not just scenery, it was authority. It decided famine or abundance, flood or drought, life or death. When power feels external and uncontrollable, it becomes divine. So it is not surprising that early myths placed gods in the heavens. But why knowledge? Why would wisdom descend from above rather than emerge from human effort? Perhaps because transformation often feels external. When a society shifts rapidly from hunting to agriculture, from tribe to city, from oral memory to written law, the change feels imposed. It feels larger than the individual. It feels beyond ordinary understanding. Imagine living in a world where writing did not exist and then suddenly encountering symbols that preserve speech. That transformation would not feel gradual. It would feel miraculous. It would feel as though something had been given, something delivered, something descending. Myth is not a newspaper. It does not record events with precision. It encodes experience. And the experience of sudden transformation is often remembered as intervention. But there is another layer. The vertical symbolism of above and below is universal. Above represents order. Below represents chaos. Above represents light. Below represents darkness. Even today, we speak this language unconsciously. High ideals, higher power, lower instincts. The structure is embedded in cognition. So when ancient myths describe beings descending from above, they may be expressing a cognitive pattern rather than a literal event. Yet the persistence of the descent motif suggests something more than simple metaphor. Across cultures, the pattern includes tension. Knowledge is given, but at a cost. Boundaries are crossed and judgment follows. Why attach consequence to knowledge? Because knowledge destabilizes hierarchy. When humans gain new understanding, they challenge existing structures. Agriculture reshapes power. Writing reshapes memory. Technology reshapes war. Every leap forward creates imbalance. Myths may be encoding this instability. The Watchers teach metallurgy and violence becomes more efficient. Prometheus gives fire and humanity becomes less dependent on the gods. The tree of knowledge is eaten and innocence disappears. Knowledge liberates, but it also disrupts, and disruption invites fear. Perhaps the recurring narrative of descent is humanity wrestling with its own growth, projecting transformation outward because accepting responsibility inward's more difficult. But even this explanation may be incomplete, because some myths describe not only knowledge, but beings who regret giving it, who are punished, who are bound, as if there was an awareness that certain thresholds should not be crossed. Is this moral storytelling or collective memory of technological acceleration? We cannot say with certainty. What we can observe is structure, above, descent, gift, consequence across polytheism, across monotheism, across civilizations. The sky remains the source, not because it is empty, but because it symbolizes what exceeds us. In the final part, we will bring these threads together and ask the question that remains beneath every myth. Did humanity create gods to explain its transformation? Or did transformation create the need for gods? After examining the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the descent motif, and the transformation of belief systems, we are left with something deeper than myth. We are left with a pattern that refuses to disappear across civilizations, across languages, across eras, beings from above, knowledge transferred, boundaries crossed, consequences endured. The details differ, the symbols shift, but the structure persists. So what does that mean? It does not automatically mean extraterrestrials. It does not automatically mean literal divine descent, and it does not automatically mean pure fiction. It means that humanity has repeatedly imagined its greatest transformations as coming from beyond itself. Why? Perhaps because transformation is unsettling. When a society changes too quickly, it does not feel organic. It feels imposed. When agriculture reorganized tribes into settlements, life changed permanently. When writing emerged, memory changed. When law codes formed, morality became institutionalized. When monotheism centralized divine authority, power structures stabilized. Each shift redefined what it meant to be human, and each shift required explanation. Myth provides explanation where certainty does not, but myth also preserves anxiety. Notice something subtle. In nearly every version of the descent narrative, knowledge is not neutral. It carries weight. It carries cost. The Watchers are punished. Prometheus is chained. Adam and Eve are expelled. Humanity is warned. Why attach consequence to progress? Because progress disrupts equilibrium. Every tool changes power. Every discovery shifts hierarchy. Knowledge redistributes authority, and authority resists redistribution. Perhaps the descent motif is not about beings from the sky at all. Perhaps it is about the human relationship with power. We look upward when we feel small. We project authority above us when we do not trust ourselves with it. We imagine knowledge as a gift from beyond because accepting that it emerged from within us is more frightening. Because if knowledge is ours, then responsibility is ours. But there is another possibility, one that does not require fantasy, yet does not dismiss mystery. Ancient myths may encode memory in symbolic form. Not memory of spacecraft or literal angels, but memory of cognitive awakening. The moment when human consciousness crossed a threshold. The moment when we became aware that we were aware. When we began asking questions, not just about survival, but about existence. That transition may have felt external, other, beyond, as if something descended. Because from the inside, transformation feels foreign. So we told stories, stories of teachers, stories of watchers, stories of lawgivers. We gave shape to change. We gave voice to power. We placed it in the sky. And over time, those stories hardened into religion, structured belief, moral law, sacred text. But beneath doctrine, beneath ritual, beneath theology, the pattern remains. Descent, knowledge, boundary, consequence. And beneath that pattern, a question. Did humanity create gods to explain its evolution, or did the experience of evolution feel so overwhelming that it demanded gods? Perhaps the real mystery is not whether beings came from the sky. Perhaps the real mystery is why we have always looked there for answers, and whether the sky was ever the source or simply a mirror.